Welcome to the second lecture in Module 3, and in this lecture we'll talk about how Rails interacts with databases. In other words, we'll focus more on this section of the architecture, from the application through how Rails connects to the database, and we'll touch a little bit on the database as well. Now, remember that we ran the scaffold generator, or if you generate models as well, it creates a database migration. And these migration files are in your Rails application, so take a look at them. They're in the directory db migrate. And when you ran the rake command and ran rake db migrate, it ran those migrations and it created a schema for you. And from that schema, your development database was created. Now, because migrations, we'll see later, can also be used to undo things. If you made a mistake or there's a particular attribute you'd like to remove from the database, you can write a migration to remove those. So the migrations have to run in the order that they were created. In order to do that, there's a timestamp that's associated with each of these migrations. So let's take a look. If we open the previously created blog application on our text editor, we'll see here's the DB directory. And under that directory, there's another directory called migrate. And let's click on that. And here you see the migration files. And this long sequence of numbers here is a timestamp. Remember that we created the post first, and it's got an earlier number than this one at the very end is the only place they differ. And this is just a script, it's Ruby code that is run in order to create this schema, and here's the schema, and that schema is used to create this database, this development.sqlite3 database. Now, Rails automatically is set up to run in 3 different environments. When you ran the Rails new command to create the blog, it created a development environment that you can use when you're developing your application, a test environment that you use to run tests, and then a production environment which is used when you deploy your application. Now, by default, when you run on Rails server, you're running in the development environment. If you'd like to run in a different environment, here's how to do it to run in the production environment. You say Rails server -E for environment production. Let's take a look. I'm in the root of the Rails blog application that we previously created. And if I type Rails server, you'll see that it starts up in the development environment. And recall what that means. When you're running in the development environment, if you make changes to source code, those changes are generally immediately reflected in the running application. So if you go to the web page and point it to the URL that's specified here, you'll see the changes made in the source code will show up in the application. Now, to stop the server from running, type Control-C. Now, if we type Rails server -E in order to specify the environment, and here I'm specifying production, it'll start the web server up running in the production environment instead. It'll use the production database in this case, and in addition, in the production mode, if you make a change to your source code, it's not reflected in the running application immediately. Another thing that happens is when running in the production environment, Rails optimizes the delivery of certain assets, for example, cascading style sheets, web pages, HTML files in other words, and JavaScript that needs to be delivered to the browser is optimized in this mode. Now, one of the architectural features that's most likely to differ between your development and your production environment is the database. During development, you want something that's simple to use. You're the only one accessing the database. And what Rails does is it sets you up to use SQLite. It's a simple file-based database that's very easy to use. When you go to production mode, though, you're going to need something that's different than SQLite because SQLite is not a production database. When an application goes into production, it can receive hundreds or even thousands of hits in seconds, and the database has to be able to handle those data requests. 2 of the most popular databases for production environments include Postgres and MySQL. Later on, I'll show you how to set up Postgres to work in your production environment. The databases that Rails sets up for you to use are specified in the database.yaml file. This is an example of something that we've discussed previously, convention over configuration. You don't want to have to spend a lot of time configuring your databases. Rails does it for you, so just go with it. This completes the second lecture in Module 3.